Did you ever have a time in your life where you had something that you really felt like you were supposed to do? Like, not just kind of thought you should do, but you had this sense that you were really supposed to do it. There was kind of this deep thing going on that, sometimes we use the word that we have a call, right? We have a call in our lives, something calling us towards something bigger, something deeper. And sometimes that thing that you experience might be for something really big. It might be some organization that's really important to you and you want to support that organization. There might be some group of people who are dealing with some kind of struggle and you want to help deal with that and help solve that. Or it might be more personal, right? It might be a family issue that's just been kind of going on out there and it's kind of getting out of control and you feel like maybe I could kind of step in and try to manage this. Maybe it's someone that you just don't talk to anymore. And you feel like it's kind of time to make that really hard phone call to go talk to them. But whatever the case, whether it's something larger in the general sense or something that's more personal, generally those things are big to us. They're not easy things for us to do. And what often happens is that we can have this sense that we are supposed to do something, that we maybe even could do something, but I don't want to do it. It might be too hard. It might be too challenging. It might be too scary. And so we find that we start to look for, maybe it wouldn't work out anyway. Right? So we start to ask ourselves a question. What difference will it make? If I step into the situation and I go through all this stuff and I put myself through all this stuff, is it really going to make any difference anyway? So why don't I just save everybody, including me, a bunch of pain and just not start in the first place? Now, it is realistic to ask that question. It is important to not have a situation where you're walking into something that is patently guaranteed to fail and you're just going to suffer in the process. That is wise decision making. But oftentimes, I think we may ask ourselves this question to make it easier just not to do it. Because I think that in addition to that question, what difference will it make? We also have to ask ourselves two other questions. If I do it, what will it mean? And if I don't do it, what will it mean? Now, very often when we ask the question, if I do it, what will it mean? Oftentimes I think what we might be asking is, if I do it, what will it mean for me? What will I have to put myself through to make this happen? But the other question, what if I don't do it? There are really two sides to that. If I don't do it, what does it mean for the people I could be helping or the person I could be reconnecting with or the situation I could help be part of the solution of? But also, what does it mean for me when I don't do something that I'm feeling strongly called to do? When I don't do something where I could be part of the solution? And when 5 years passes by, 10 years passes by, 20 years passes by, and I look back at that moment when I could have done something that would have made a difference, and I didn't. I think we all have lived long enough, or at least most of us have lived long enough, to realize that my biggest regrets in my life lean way more towards what I did not do over what I did do. And I think that's something we want to keep in mind, that you have unique abilities, you have unique gifts. There are things that you can uniquely do that no one else will do the way you will do them. And when we choose not to use those to make a difference, no one can perfectly step in and fill that gap for you. Doesn't mean other people won't come forward to do the thing, but you would have done it differently. And maybe you would have done it in a way that could have made a difference at least to somebody. And I think that's the thing we have to realize, is that, we live in a time where we are the most informationally overblown society in history, right? We have information coming at us constantly. And although that's kind of neat, there's a side effect to that. The side effect is that we know everything that's happening everywhere. Right? We know everything that's happening in your town. You know everything that's happening in your state, in your country, in the world. And you look at all those things, and I look at all those things, and they're like, I can't fix all this. So what do? We kind of put up a shell. We're like, I can't fix everything, so I'm not going to fix anything. And I think that's a very dangerous place to land in life. That we could safely just kind of curl up, kind of bunch up a little bit, just ride through the years and get to the other side somehow. Or we can do more, right? Because none of us can solve all the issues in the world, but all of us can solve something. And all of us have something out there that we can go do to make a difference. But the struggle is real, right? It is scary to step out into a difficult situation, whether it's a personal one or something larger. It is scary. And so we kind of don't want to do it. So what I wanted to do today was actually walk through a narrative that really kind of gives us a really good picture of what this process is like and how this process can end up if we're willing to engage in the process of embracing the fact that we are called to do something. We may resist it, we may struggle, but that ultimately we can actually do something impactful in the end. And to do this, I'm going to actually go back to the Old Testament. What we call the Old Testament, the ancient Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew Bible. And these documents are old. The one we're going to look at today actually captures an event that we believe is the early 8th century BC. So that's like 2,800 years ago. So as we go through this, it's actually the book of Jonah, the guy with the fish. And so I wanted to kind of jump into the book, kind of like right in the beginning, and see where it takes us. So right at the beginning, chapter 1, verse 1, says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh, preach against it, because its wickedness has come before me." Now that sounds like so Old Testament, doesn't it? Like fire and brimstone. Get in there, tell them the evil that they're doing. They're going to be destroyed unless they change their habits. And in English, that is very much what it looks like. But the thing we always want to remember is that there was no English Bible written. Right? There's the Hebrew Bible, there's the Greek Bible, there's some Aramaic and some other stuff mixed in there. But anything that we read in English has been translated from something else, in this case from Hebrew. And this call here which says, go out and preach against it. I want to just dig in on this word, preach. Now, the word preach that we have in this Bible actually comes from the Hebrew word kara. It can be translated different ways. Now, this is the NIV Bible, one of the more popular Bibles. They've translated as preach. The New American Standard Bible translated it as cry out, so cry out against it. But if you actually dig into the Hebrew, this is actually a really rich word. And that's something that's so important to remember. You can accurately translate from one language to another, but still lose some of the richness of the language. And I think that might be what's happening here. Because that same word can also be translated as summon. And it can even be translated as invite, as to invite a guest. So what it looks like is Jonah's supposed to go out there and just kind of do the whole fire and brimstone, sling it at them, give them the whole deal. But what he's also called to do is invite them. Invite them towards God. And actually tell them that God's grace, mercy, and love are available to them. And invite them towards that. Now, the thing that makes this story kind of interesting is that Jonah doesn't want to. In fact, Jonah really doesn't want to. Do you know why Jonah doesn't want to? Because Nineveh is the capital city of the Assyrian nation. The Assyrians, if you look at ancient history and you were to line up the most brutal, overpowering, inhumane nations that ever existed, the Assyrians are right near the top of that list. Most of how the Assyrians fought wars would be considered war crimes now, because they were just brutal. And not only were they brutal, they had conquered Israel. So what Jonah is being asked to do is go to the city, the capital city of the country that has conquered your nation and all the horrors of war that you have seen them commit and say, hey, you know what? God's grace, mercy, and love are available to you. And Jonah doesn't want to do that. He feels like God is asking him to do too much. And so he begins to resist. And he figures the best way to get out of doing this is get some distance between him and the city. So what Jonah does is Jonah ran away. He's trying to run away from the Lord, headed toward Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, we can be very quick to turn on Jonah. Hey, you don't want to do it. I get you don't want to do it, but you've got this call, right? God's telling you to go do it. Now, keep in mind that nowhere in the narrative does it say that some of the parts of the Old Testament will say like the angel of the Lord showed up, or the Word of God, or the presence of God. We don't see that in this. So the narrative indicates that he got this sense the way you and I get the sense of God calling us to do something. That voice that's kind of inside that just kind of leads you to do it. And so as he looks at this, he says, God's asked me to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm going to run away. But as he runs away, he kind of faces a challenge. First, he has the challenge of trying to figure out whether to actually do this or not, because he doesn't want to do it. But then also, as he's in this challenge, we want to recognize that what he is doing in this situation, and please understand, I'm about to include myself in what I say. He's doing what all of us do. There are times when we feel like there's something we should do, and we just don't want to. So we find reasons and we find ways not to do it. He just happened to use a boat to do it. I can use all kinds of things. I got to work. I can't go today. I'm kind of busy. Oh, I got to visit my mom. I can't help out. Right? We all have things like that. But now, of course, with Jonah, the way he tries to do it is get on this boat and sail away. But we know, because most of us have heard this story in some form, he doesn't get very far. Right? He gets on the boat, heads out to sea. The boat has a storm. Jonah finds himself thrown into the water. And then we hit the most famous part of the Jonah narrative. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And now a risk rises up for all of us, actually. Here's this narrative that's doing this great job of maybe paralleling the human experience of struggling to figure out how to do something, and we hit this fish thing. And so often we can get derailed by this, because different people believe this verse very differently. Right? Some people say, you know what, it's the Bible. The Bible's true. It's got to be literally true. There must literally be a fish there, which is reasonable for us. Other people say that, I believe the Bible's true, but this is capturing an event. And good authors use hyperbole, right? They use metaphors. So basically, they're saying the belly of the fish is just being trapped out at sea. He's just floating through the water, hanging onto boards or something. Just like we might say today, you were trapped in the belly of the beast. You're in a difficult situation. You can't find a way out. I was in the belly of the beast. So some people say it has to be literally true. Some people say the story's true, this is hyperbole. Other people say that, well, maybe it's more like a parable. Maybe it's just an allegory. Maybe this is here just to paint the human existence and what it's like to go through all this. And those are all great attitudes. Those are all great questions. But they're questions for another time. Because the thing is that it's a lot of fun to think about those things. And I think it's really healthy that when groups of us believe the Bible differently, it is really healthy to talk about how we see it differently and what I believe and what you believe and why do I believe that and how do I see that. Those are really healthy conversations as long as we don't miss the most important point of the story. The point of the story is not the fish. Right? The point of the story is the human struggle of dealing with this idea that there are things that pull hard on our hearts and we resist doing them. And if we look at the story, if we look at the narrative in that sense, Jonah gives us incredible insight. Because Jonah is trapped in this tension of wanting to honor his relationship with God, wanting to do the thing God wants him to do, but in his case, he literally hates these people. He doesn't want anything to do with these people. He would never choose to walk into that city. And so he's struggling through it. And in his case, he now finds himself lost at sea, disconnected from other people, basically helpless. And I think it does a really good job of modeling how we feel when we are in those places, when we are struggling to figure out what to do. And also when we're struggling to figure out what to do about something we feel called to do, but also when we're struggling because we've made choices that have led to difficulties in our life. And now we feel trapped by those choices, and we feel like we can't get forward from those choices. And what we see then, if we look at what Jonah went through, it's that it's in those times when we feel helpless, when we feel lost, when we feel like we've just got this thing tearing at us to decide what to do. That's when we start to lean into God. It's often those difficulties and those tensions and that I just don't know what to do next that causes us to go, God, maybe I put myself here, maybe I didn't. But this is where I am now, and I don't know how to get out of here. So God, I want to look to you. What are you really asking me to do here? How are you asking me to see the call on my life? How are you asking me to see my relationship with you? How are you asking me to see the relationships with people in my life? And we wrestle with that. And I think the key thing to recognize here too is that it is okay to wrestle it out with God. It is okay to fight with God. It is okay to yell at God and be mad at God because of where you are. Because healthy relationships are honest. I mean, imagine a marriage where you never fought, ever. I mean, mine, of course, we never fight, of course, but everybody else, right? Right? Healthy relationships have fights. They do, because if not, you're not being honest with one another. And that's what God wants from us. And Jonah demonstrates that in this, he fights with God about what to do. And we actually realize, or we see that he realizes that in that fight, how close he is to God and how much God is there for him in his distress, in his pain, in his struggle. Even as he tried to turn his back on God and forget about God, God did not turn his back on him. And God did not forget about him. And God is active in his life. And we see a little glimpse of that from a portion of a prayer we have of Jonah's. It says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry." He recognizes that God is there with him, and that God is leading him, and that even through all of this, God feels no differently about him. Through all of his mistakes, through all of his choices, God's love and mercy is available to him, which then helps Jonah see that in all of his mistakes, God's love and mercy is available to him, that same love and mercy is available to everyone, including the Assyrians. So Jonah finds himself back on shore, goes to the city of Nineveh, and does what he's called to do, which in his case was to tell the people of the city about God. Now, it's kind of interesting that if you actually get in there and read the book of Jonah, he does what God called him to do, but he does it with a really bad attitude. He still gets out there kind of slewing fire and brimstone and all these things that are going to happen. But in spite of his bad attitude, in spite of his obvious dislike and probable hate for these people, it turns out pretty successful. He does what he was called to do, and what we're told is the Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. In other words, they were repenting, is what that means. So basically, he did what he was supposed to do. He responded to the call on his life, and it was more successful than he could have imagined. And that's the thing I want us to all take from this. We all have a call on our lives. In my case, what I do, we actually refer to it as a call. But we all have a call, right? We are all called to help somebody have a better life. We are all called to invest in the lives of people around us. And we can do that. We can do that in so many ways. As I talked about, that we can do it kind of from larger standpoints in terms of investing in organizations or groups of people. But honestly, some of the hardest ones of all are the personal ones that may just be impacting one or two or a few people. But investing in people in your life that you are close to, who you've had a really difficult relationship with, or maybe have a lifestyle where they're kind of falling over a lot. Sometimes they're the hardest people of all to invest in. But whether it's something big or small, right? Family, friends, or an organization, or a group of people, you can do it. And my bet is that if we all stop for a second, we all have a sense of that. There's something tugging at each of us, and it's probably not the same thing. But again, one of the important things is to recognize is that don't be drawn towards every single problem you see, right? There are lots of things that we know about in an information inundated world that can make us feel bad about things. Feeling bad about something, we want to have empathy, that's important, but feeling bad about something is not a call, right? A call is something that just grabs onto you. And as much as you try to resist it, you can't seem to resist it, or it's work to resist it, or it just keeps popping up, or reminders keep showing up. We all have one of those. It's just a matter of embracing that and recognizing that we can do something with it. Now, as I prepare to wrap up, I wanted to finish up with a short video that really captures what can happen when we respond to a call in our lives. Now, this video I'm going to show you in just a moment is actually someone that Bonnie and I know. Her name is Debbie Scott Robinson. She's a woman we met when we were at a church down in Florida. And Debbie's from England, and she's an ordinary person, I will say. But as we watch this video, you'll see that this ordinary person felt a call on her life, and through it, did extraordinary things.
Hello, I'm Debbie Scott Robinson. Sorry not to be with you today, but coming to you visually instead. It seems to be the new normal at the moment. Jimbo asked me to just tell my story, so I'm happy to share it with you. Basically, it all started in 2006 when I went on a family holiday to Kenya. We were in a lovely hotel on the beach, but I wanted to get away and see the real Kenya. So we went out into the village, and there I saw they had a Baptist church. I'm a Christian, and at home I go to a Baptist church. So I went back on the Sunday. The service was great. It was all in Swahili, but the pastor did translate into English, especially for us. So that was lovely. Afterwards, I found out that the pastor was looking after 10 children who had lost their parents to AIDS. I thought it was terrible, but it didn't actually think I would end up doing anything about it. In fact, we visited the local primary school and sponsored a couple of children there. And I actually got on the plane feeling like I'd done my bit. However, when I got home, I feel God had another idea. I was actually praying about the plight of the children, and this particular day I was reading some Bible guide notes that said it's better to have a dream and fail trying to achieve that dream than not have a dream at all. And I thought, I don't have a dream. And at that moment it was just like God spoke to my heart, and he said, yes you do. It's to build an orphanage, feed, clothe and educate those children, those 10 children in Kenya. And I had my Bible open at the time, and I just went, ugh! It was so scary because I thought, I'm an English woman living in England. What do I know about building an orphanage in Kenya? So I thought, okay, this is too scary. I am not going to pray anymore. So for a few days, I didn't pray, but I just couldn't get it out of my mind. It was just constantly there. So after 3 days, I came back to my prayer time and I said, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, you're going to have to put people in my path to help me, because I know nothing about building an orphanage in Kenya. A few days later, a neighbour came and knocked on my door. Opened the door. He said, "Oh, I don't know why I'm knocking on your door, but I just feel like I'd like to raise money for poor people in Africa." Well, my jaw just dropped open. I couldn't believe it. And I said, "My goodness," I said, "I think you're an answer to my prayer." And he said, "Well, I've never been called an answer to a lady's prayer before." Anyway, he came in, we sat down, we started talking, and that was the beginning. And a year later, we had the first half of the orphanage built, and those 10 children that were in Utangi moved in. We carried on fundraising, and then another year later we took more children, and today we have 21 children in Casuarina House.
Don't panic. I'm not saying we need to go to Africa. That's not what the video is about, right? For Debbie, the path was to Africa, but it's probably not for you. I don't think it's for me, right? But the key there is that, and this is part of a longer video. I'm not the Jimbo in the video, by the way. This is part of a longer video where she tells a very long version of her story. But the thing I wanted to really capture from that is that Debbie shows us what is possible when we answer God's call on our lives. And it doesn't have to be Africa, and it doesn't have to be 20 orphans. Right? We are each called to make a difference somehow, some way. But Debbie shows us what I think is the kind of the model of how God does it. Because you realize that she went to Kenya on vacation. Because Kenya's kind of interesting, because Maya and I have had the chance to have dinner with her and her husband a few times, and it's fantastic stories of what goes on in their lives and the way God moves in their lives and through their lives. But in Kenya, it's kind of odd because you've got these very high-end hotels along the water. But if you go inland, it's nothing like that. And that's where it started for her. And she became aware of what was going on. And she did what most of us struggle to do. She saw something that broke her heart, and she let it break her heart. We are conditioned to resist those things. Now, again, I want to be clear. Not everything should break our heart. But sometimes something just grabs a hold of you in a different sort of way. And that's what she saw, and that's what she experienced. And that's what she did. And she started out by taking a small step. What was her first step? Did you catch it? She sponsored a couple of the children. She was like, "Oh, that's something I can do. I'll sponsor a couple of the children." But then as she got involved, she felt called to do more. And I want to be clear, I'm not about to hit you guys with give to some issue, or I'm not going to say, hey, give money to this. That's not what this is about. What this is about is recognizing the way God moves in our lives. And so when she started out with something small, she got more involved and started to understand more about what was going on, and she started to feel God's tug on her heart more deeply. And what did she do? She wrestled with it. She literally threw her Bible across the room. She kind of softens it for this, but the story is she threw it. Because she didn't want any part of that. And she kind of disconnected from God completely for days. But then it stayed with her. And then as she got more willing to go forward, I think she shows us what she does. What we should do is that in the struggle, she didn't run away, but she also didn't run into it. Right? She kind of lived in that tension for a little bit until she started to feel like there was something more that she could do. And as she shared with us, she started out with 10 orphans, and then it got to be more. I mean, ultimately, they had over 20 orphan children that they feed, house, clothe, and educate. Because one of the things that she doesn't really touch on in the video, in Kenya, the AIDS pandemic commonly kills both parents in a household. It's a very common occurrence. So you have these children. So they start out with the orphanage. Now, of course, you can only do that for so many people. But she became aware, once she was further into it, of other ways that she could help. Because she was aware that there were actually hundreds of children who had lost their parents, but the people in the village could give those kids a place to stay. The problem is the people could give the kids a place to stay, but they couldn't afford to feed any additional children. So what did she do? They now feed over 500 additional children every week. Some of these kids walk an hour to get the food for the week and then walk back home. And then she was involved in that. She's learned more about what it's like for life in Kenya. In Kenya, school is only free until 8th grade. If you want to go to high school, you got to pay. These kids couldn't pay. So what do? They created free high school. Right now, over 200 kids go to school for free in high school. And then most recently, they've partnered with someone to now have a free medical facility that takes care of basic medical needs and psychological care. All of this started because she felt a tension to do something more, was willing to deal with that tension, and step into it. Again, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that we're called to go to Africa. I don't feel called to go to Africa, right? That any of us have to do something this big. It starts quite small. I think successful things do start quite small. It's just being willing to do it, being unafraid to do it. And I think the thing that really kind of grabbed me as I was watching this video recently was this statement. It's better to have a dream and fail than to not have a dream at all. It is natural to be afraid to fail. But it also is kind of a little bit unhealthy to never be afraid to fail. You know, I'm a guy who kind of dances from side to side. At any moment, I'm convinced I can do anything. And I get in it going, what was I thinking? This is terrible. You know, but we all have those struggles, right? We all work through those things. That's called being human. It's the human experience. But it's when we embrace our humanity and we recognize that it's in our humanity that we are closest to God. We are most like God when we let our humanity draw us towards other humanity to make a difference. So the message I would leave with all of us is that as you feel God pulling on you to do something, don't be afraid to be afraid. Be willing to be in that tension. Be willing to be uncertain. Be willing to step out. And be willing to start small. Because I think when we have that call in our lives and we embrace it, we recognize that that is part of being the community of God. Taking care of one another, those who know God, but being equally loving and equally open to caring for those who do not know God.